Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining this session on the challenges and trends for accountability institutions. And obviously, thanks to the World Justice Project, who invited the IDI, Intersite Development Initiative, and all the panelists to participate to this session. Just a couple of words for those who are not really familiar with the mention of SAIs, Supreme Audit Institutions, Intersite Development Initiative. Supreme Audit Institutions are really institutions that are established to audit public funds and report to key constituencies on how those funds are managed. And those SCIs that we found in each country are regrouped into an organization that is called the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, or Intersite. So now let me go to IDI. IDI, the Intersite Development Initiative, is a branch of the Intersite specialized in capacity development for all the audit institutions around the world. So it's our pleasure to really bring that session and focus on some of the challenges and trends that we're seeing across the spectrum. And from that angle, we would like to look at the accountability as this network of institutions and relationships. That's why here we want to think about trends and challenges affecting the accountability ecosystem. And for that angle, we would like to address 3 points. The first one is really looking at some of the current trends and development affecting the democratic environment and how this has a relationship with the role of accountability institutions. The other trend is related to the necessary collaboration and institutional cooperation that should exist between those institutions. And we will also like to reflect a bit on one point, which is the level of protection that those institutions should have to fulfill on their mandates. And it's my pleasure for that to introduce the panelists who will walk us through this whole interesting discussion. The first one is Mrs. Silke Steiner, who is the director of the General Secretariat of the Intersite that I referred to previously. And just to give a bit of her background, Silke has a PhD in law studies from the University of Graz in Austria, and also several other degrees in public accounting and auditing. And before joining the Court of Audit, Silke worked for the European Commission and also the Austrian Foreign Ministry. That will be our first panelist. The second one will be Ewout Irkan, who is the member of the Netherlands Court of Audit Board. And he has been a member of that audit court since September 2017. But he has a wealth of experience as a parliamentarian. So I think he will really enlighten us on the value added of the audit institution in this specific context of the Netherlands. But moving away from the size, we will also have other accountability actors at the table. And we have the pleasure to have with us Dr. Joram Dury from Transparency International Secretariat, who is the horizontal accountability specialist. And he will also present us this perspective of the accountability institutions looking at their role. And finally, last but not least, who will join us online, we will have Tim Steele as a senior advisor on the anti-corruption at the UNODC, which is the UN Office of Drugs and Crimes. And Tim Steele will address one specific element of this cooperation and institutional collaboration between anti-corruption bodies, but also supreme audit institutions. So I think we have a wealth of expertise that will guide us, and we do hope that after this first round of presentation, we will have contributions that will help us have a very lively session. So without further ado, please help me introduce Mrs. Silke Steiner.
Yeah, thank you very much, Freddie, for this very informative introduction and for explaining the abbreviations we're using in the Intersite world. Good afternoon from my side. I'm happy to be here with you today and to elaborate a little bit on a very, very important issue. So what I would like to present to you in my first presentation now is, first of all, how important Supreme Audit institutions, short SAIs, are in ensuring transparency, accountability, and also the rule of law in government's action. And second, how INTOSAI, the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, is supporting Supreme Audit institutions in these important tasks, because, as Freddie already said, unfortunately, we are still facing obstacles in our important tasks. So, first of all, I would like to point out, or I would like to address how and why Supreme Audit institutions are so important, also with regard to the rule of law, because they promote, through their audit activities, transparency and accountability of public administration. And this is a fact that is already well known, and this is a fact that has also even been confirmed by 2 resolutions of the UN General Assembly of 2011 and 2014, and we are very proud of these resolutions in the INTOSAI community. And at the same time, already these resolutions stress that SAIs can, however, only fulfill this important task and make this important contribution if their independence is guaranteed. And as I already said, the most important tools we are having in fulfilling these tasks are our audits. And these audits go far beyond just mere financial assessments, but at least most SAIs have the mandate to really conduct performance audits. This means really to assess the performance of their government's actions. And by carrying out these independent audits and by publishing the audit reports, SAIs dispose of very efficient tools to, as I said, promote accountability and transparency, to fight corruption, and to contribute to the rule of law. Furthermore, Supreme Audit institutions can, as independent oversight institutions, also make an essential contribution to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development and the SDGs. And in particular, to SDG number 16, which we always see also as kind of our goal, peace, justice, and strong institutions. And especially the recent developments have shown that transparent, accountable, and efficient institutions, as provided for by SDG 16.6, are more important and more relevant than ever. Because you all know the present challenges we are facing, caused by the pandemic, caused by the economic crisis. And we as SCI have a key role in this regard. Because, as you all know, during the recent years, in the light of the crisis, enormous amounts of money have been spent. And of course, this development entailed an increased risk of corruption, especially in areas with high risk potentials and high level of expenditures. And especially in these areas, it's of course essential that transparency and accountability are being maintained. And now I'm coming back again to our role as SAIs, because we of course can make an important contribution by ensuring transparency and accountability. And the recent years have already illustrated how important SAIs are and how they can serve parliaments, of course, governments, but also the citizens. Citizens are an important target group of SAIs as well. How can we serve them? By conducting, for example, audits on specific crisis funds, but also by auditing in general the financial flows in the light of COVID-19. And this creation of transparency and also financial sustainability are central to our work as SAIs. And this is again closely interlinked also to our contributions to the implementation of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, however, SAIs can only fulfill this important role if they're independent. And there I would like to introduce a core principle of INTOSAI to you, and this is the so-called Mexico Declaration. The Mexico Declaration on SAI Independence, dated back to 2007, and this Mexico Declaration is a kind of really core principle of INTOSAI and of the standards of Supreme Audit institutions. So if we had a constitution, it would be part of it, I'm sure. And this Mexico Declaration contains 8 core principles that have to be fulfilled and that are defining the independence of SAIs. And the first core principle, core pillar of this Mexico Declaration is the existence of an appropriate constitutional, statutory, or legal framework. And, of course, also very important, the de facto application of this framework. So you see the Mexico Declaration clearly defines as a constitutional framework or an appropriate legal framework as a core feature and as a prerequisite for SCI's independence, because only if the mandate of the SCI is clearly defined by the law or ideally by the constitution, then SCIs can really appropriately exercise their tasks. And the Mexico Declaration also contains further principles. They refer to financial and organizational independence. And of course, the results of our audits, of the audits of SCIs, can only become effective and have a sustainable impact if we can publish our audit reports. And this is globally seen, unfortunately, often, or quite often, still not the case. So unfortunately, SCIs around the globe still face obstacles and challenges regarding their independence. And the COVID-19 crisis, one has to say, unfortunately, has even increased this problem and had an additional negative effect on the independence of SCIs, for example, through budget restrictions. So this session has been organized by the IDI, the Interstate Development Initiative, and I would like to highlight the important work of the IDI in this regard. For example, the IDI is regularly publishing a report, the so-called Global SCI Stocktaking Report, and this report, as the name already indicates, is taking stock inter alia of the independence of SCIs. This report is published every 3 years, and the latest version was published last year, and it showed that there are still some troubling findings related to SCI independence, like, for example, I just mentioned budget restrictions, so still 40% of SCIs still experience interferences in the execution of their budgets, for example, and only 44% of SCIs have timely, unconstrained, and free access to information. And for this reason, Intosai has been very active during the last years in order to support and advocate for the independence of SCIs. This is also one of the main cross-cutting priorities of the strategic plan of Intosai, the current one, and it will also again be a main priority of our next strategic plan, which is just currently being drafted. And in order to implement this priority, we have launched several initiatives. I would like to highlight, for example, a mechanism developed by the IDI. It's called SIREM, SCI Independent Rapid Advocacy Mechanism. And this is a 4-stages mechanism that defines necessary steps that will be taken in case there is a threat to independence of SCIs, for example, due to legal reforms or political developments in a country. Furthermore, recently, or a few months ago, we have appointed a goodwill ambassador for SCI independence. And we are very happy that Ms. Helen Clark, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand and administrator of UNDP, could be convinced to assume this role. And this role, I think, is really very important because it aims, of course, at bringing the issue of SCI independence really on the global political agenda. Now, another main priority of Intosai, which is also closely interlinked to the promotion of the rule of law, is, as I already mentioned, the contribution of SCIs to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. Again, we are contributing through our audits, because through our audits we are monitoring and reviewing the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. And also in this regard, Intosai is supporting SCIs, as I already say, in particular in contributing to SDG 16, but also in general to the achievement of the SDGs. And we have also launched a number of initiatives in this regard. In the first stage of the SDG implementation, our focus lay on assessing the so-called preparedness of national governments to implement the SDGs. What does preparedness mean? It means to assess the institutional mechanism that has been established by national governments to implement the SDGs, because, of course, in order to guarantee an efficient implementation of the SDGs, a sound institutional mechanism is the first and foremost prerequisite. And in this regard, Intosai supported, or the IDI supported, more than 70 SCIs around the globe in conducting these performance audits, assessing the preparedness of governments. And now, in the meantime, our focus has shifted from assessing the preparedness to really auditing the implementation of specific goals or targets. And also in this regard, Intosai is supporting SCIs for example, through the development of an SDG audit model by the IDI, or also through initiating cooperative audit on specific goals and targets like gender equality or health. Of course, public health also a very important issue at the moment. Yeah, and finally, I also would like to briefly address our cooperation with the United Nations. This is already a long-standing cooperation. We have been working together for more than 50 years, organizing common events, capacity-building events, the UN Intercity Symposia. And recently, we have again intensified this cooperation in the framework of the implementation of the SDGs. So we have organized also several events, for example, in the framework of the UN HLBF, the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. And we will also organize another side event this year in the framework of the HLBF. So with this, I would like to come to an end and conclude. So I hope I could give you a first insight in how important we are as SCIs and what Intersa is doing in order to support this. And I'd just like to say in concluding that all these initiatives have the same goal. They just aim to support independent and relevant SCIs with a huge impact that will continue to present their reports to the parliaments, governments, and to the citizens, and also to fulfill their role in ensuring transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Silke, for setting the stage and showing what we're doing. And I think it's very important to reflect on the SAIs, their role, mandate, but also some of the existing international instruments that we can rely on and the work that is done by the Intosite. But now I think it could be good to bring the point home by seeing how an SAI is actually contributing to that. And we'll now give the floor to Mr. Elwood for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to The Hague. SAI, Supreme Audit Institution. It's quite a typical acronym. But since you are in The Hague, maybe I should share with you what does SAI mean in the Dutch language. Do you know already? Well, SAI means boring in the Dutch language, which is a great source of jokes at my office. And thank you for that. But it begs also a question, is the work of Supreme Audit Institution, is it boring? Or is it actually very important? And yeah, it's up to you to judge, but in my opinion, working on accountability, accounting, auditing, is definitely not boring. But I will share some of our work, and it's up to you to judge whether what we do is boring or actually very important. Before I start, I would like to introduce two distinguished guests from Libya, which are here today as well. And they are actually accompanying me, Mr. Khaled Ahmed Sheikh. He is the president of the Libyan Audit Bureau, the Libyan SAI, Supreme Audit Institution of Libya. And Mr. Aladdin Mansour El-Masalati, he is the vice president of the Libyan Audit Bureau. My name is Ewart Eergang. I'm vice president of the Netherlands Court of Audit, the Netherlands Supreme Audit Institution. And I will explain a bit more later why they are here today. IDI asked me to contribute a bit about what we do. And let me just say that Silke already mentioned a lot what IDI does. I'm a big fan of IDI. They do very important work, and also the CIRA mechanism, which was recently introduced. We work together with IDI a lot in countries where that is really needed, because the independence of SAI is at stake. And now let me share how independent auditing can promote accountability and good governance, actually. I guess this audience today is mainly non-auditors, so let me start by introducing the Netherlands Court of Audit. We play a pivotal role in accountability of the government, the central government, towards Dutch citizens and taxpayers. The court's mission is to investigate whether the government spends public money, correctly, effectively, and efficiently. And court in our name is basically a remnant from the past. We don't have judicial power of enforcement. In this audience, it's good to underline that. Our main accountability partner is actually the Dutch Parliament. And this is where the accountability of the Dutch central government has its central place. And our existence and independence is grounded in the Dutch constitution. And the word supreme in Supreme Audit Institution doesn't mean that we are above the turbulence of our time, and our role and position is safe. We need to show relevance, like all Supreme Audit institutions, time and again. And to be effective, we need to be heard in a political and societal environment where fake news is becoming common. And trusted institutions, they can present real facts, and that has added value. And we try to be one of those trusted institutions. And spending public money should first and foremost benefit our citizens. Therefore, in our current strategy, we aim to approach our audits from the perspective of citizens and businesses, and keep the consequences of government policies for citizens right into the center of our work. Also, supreme and independent doesn't mean looking down to earth from sort of an ivory tower. We try to connect with other accountability partners and knowledge partners, with citizens, civil society organizations, with our auditees, and with Supreme Audit institutions in other countries. And yeah, this way we hope to keep innovating and learn from others. And I will give you some examples. In order to learn around the topic and gather valuable information during an audit, we often involve experts and civil societies to gather relevant data and knowledge. And sometimes we even go further and see if we can do work together and, for instance, synchronize our reports and coordinate messages. I'll give you just three examples. In our 2016 audit about tackling problem debt, we teamed up with the National Ombudsman in the Netherlands and the Netherlands Scientific Council for Government Policy. And each of us doing separate reports on the topic from each institution's specific perspective and also mandate. And in the end, we coordinated the timing of our separate reports and our messages, and we briefed the minister and the parliamentary committee together to strengthen our message. And in 2018, we did something similar around the investigation we did on access to long-term care. The National Ombudsman and the Netherlands Institute for Social Research, they did similar research, and they published their reports on this topic, and we concluded that we actually had the same or very similar conclusions and outcomes. So we decided to make a joint appeal in an interview to the national newspaper and launched our appeal towards the House of Parliament, the House of Representatives, to ask the government to work on better access to long-term care. And the Parliament, they took up this appeal, and this resulted in a motion in Parliament to the government to work on this. And another example concerns our work on the use of data and algorithms in policy implementation. As in most other countries, the Dutch government has digitized a large part of its administration, and as a result works with very large data sets. And this allows government entities to work with algorithms when taking decisions and implementing policies. So they can definitely be useful, helpful, but they're also not without risk. And if something goes wrong, it can have a big impact on the lives of citizens. In 2019, we published our first report, Understanding Algorithms. And it was the first time that we looked at algorithms used by the Dutch central government. And there was a wide public interest in algorithms, and there were many initiatives, standards, guidelines developed by different stakeholders. And we brought all those experts together to help us develop a unique audit framework, which, by the way, is on our website. So any Supreme Audit institution can take it up and use it as a practical tool that we intended to use in our future audit. There are 5 different perspectives for investigating algorithms in this audit framework. governance and accountability, model and data, privacy, IT general controls. This last one sounds very boring, but it's actually very important because it means that not every government employee can access data, change something in the data, look into your personal details, and it's often overlooked. And finally, ethics, which is basically part of all, and bias, last but not least. And we used this audit framework in a recent audit, which was published, I think, 2 weeks ago. And we used this audit to, in this audit, we audited 9 algorithms, from very simple to quite complex. And we found that 6 out of the 9 algorithms we looked at the Dutch central government did not meet all the basic requirements and expose the government and its citizens to various risks, from inadequate control over the performance of an algorithm, its impact on citizens, to bias also. Data leaks were also big risks, and unauthorized access. For instance, the criminality anticipation system, CAS, used by the police here in the Netherlands to forecast where and when there is a high risk of incidents, did not meet any of our key requirements. So it's up to the responsible minister and the police itself to decide whether it's safe to continue using this algorithm, but there's a lot to do. So that's a question they need to answer. This audit framework is intended primarily for auditors, but it can also be used right from the start when building an algorithm as input for the quality requirements which are essential. And of course as a reference for any other accountability partner. A radical way to improve accountability is to engage with all citizens as armchair auditors. And since mid-2020, the Netherlands Court of Audit has been keeping the so-called Corona account, on which we keep track of all the Corona crisis measures taken by the Dutch central government. And what is the purpose and how much public funds have been spent or budgeted for. What you see here is the 5th edition, but we are currently already at the 7th edition, and the grand total is 85.5 billion euro. So it's an enormous amount of money. So, and I completely agree with all the remarks by Silke Steiner about the risks for corruption and fraud. If you spend so much public money so quickly, public money so quickly, there are obviously big risks. And you can see also we're not talking about a few measures, 234, a lot of money. Even to have the overview is a challenge. And we offer all these data as an interactive dashboard on our website, or linked to our website, on which citizens, members of parliament, journalists and other interested parties can search and inspect as your own armchair auditor all the measures and public money spent on them. Now, I would like to get back to my guests from Libya. As I said in the beginning, public money requires public accountability, not just in the Netherlands, but worldwide. Supreme audit institutions worldwide operate in obviously very different political, social and economic environments, but maybe surprisingly to you, they also have many things in common. And we found out with our Libyan friends this week again. And this is where we can learn from each other, and we all try to audit to promote accountability. And that is why the Netherlands Court of Audit is involved in peer-to-peer capacity building, professionals and leadership from SAIs working together to become better auditors and become better Supreme Audit institutions. And our projects are aimed primarily at reinforcing the role, mandate and impact of SAIs as independent external auditors as part of the overall system of public finance and accountability. And this is why before we embark on a partnership project, we always examine the context in which a Supreme Audit institution operates, take note of relevant development initiatives, and we work together with stakeholders and strategic partners. We also take the long-term outlook into account. The context in which our partners work is often very complex, meaning that it really takes time to make an impact, to change things. We formulate objectives together with our partners at the start of every new project. We evaluate like we always recommend others to do. And Mr. Shekshek and Mr. El Masalati are here in preparation of joining our Sharaka program, which is a bigger program in which the Netherlands Court of Audit works together with with SAIS in the Middle East and the Northern Africa region. And Sharaka means a partnership in Arabic. It's our longest running program, and it's funded by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And since the start of the program, we have worked together with Tunisia, the SAIS from Tunisia, Morocco, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Algeria, Sudan, Palestine, and tomorrow officially, but already today, not officially, the Supreme Audit Institution from Libya, Libyan Audit Bureau. We will be working together on better SDG performance audits, also something Ms. Steiner also mentioned, on applying IntoSaint to promote and stimulate integrity in the public sector. And we plan to work together on strengthening our relation with stakeholders and strategic partners, Parliament, but also we are not just reporting to Parliament. We are there for citizens in the end. So this is a bit to share what we are doing. We don't think our work is boring, but very important. But we are a Supreme Audit institution from the Netherlands. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for bringing the point home. And I think we're not boring, right? I think we could see that it's very interesting and that they're also addressing very timely issues. I really like the point on the algorithm. And also, one thing that will help transition to the next speaker is that it's very citizen-centered. So here, how do we bring the elements of the citizenry, and how do we make sure that as accountability institutions and players, they're factored in? And for that, we will ask Dr. Jerome Dory to take the stage and share his perspective. Thank you, Jerome.
Thank you, Freddie. Hello, everyone. So first of all, let me start by thanking IDI for their invitation to this very important discussion. The work of accountability institutions is key for us and has been one of the core focus on Transparency International since our inception in 1993. As a movement, we have supported the work of oversight institutions such as SAIS and recognize the important role in holding government to account as well as keeping government in check. So I'm very pleased to be part of this very interesting discussion. Now, let me start my presentation by just giving an overview of what is Transparency International. Transparency International, we are a global movement which operates in more than 100 countries and with a common goal, and the common goal is holding the powerful and corrupt to account. Why do we fight corruption? Because it weakens democratic institutions, it weakens good governance, it hampers economic sustainability, and also exacerbates issues such as social inequality, poverty division, as well as fuel issues like conflict, as well as crisis. Now, moving on to my presentation, which is going to focus more on how as TI we play a role in supporting, oversight institutions, in regards to their independence or, performance or capacity. I think one thing which is very important is to contextualize the issue, which is the trend on democratic, backsliding. So I think going on to my next slide, is just look at the research on the trends. If you look at various governance indices, for example, the Democracy Index, Freedom in the World Report, as well as the Civicus Monitor, they all indicate that there is a decline in democracy and there is continued shrinking of civic space. As we are an evidence-based advocacy organization, we have some research analysis from our research tools, such as the Corruption Perceptions Index, that I would like to share with you some of our work that is related to democracy, as well as to accountability institutions. So here, the Corruption Perceptions Index, maybe I've been explained. This is our global tool which measures the perceived levels of corruption in a country. The results are given on a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 is highly corrupt and 100 is very clean. So from our analysis of the Corruption Perceptions Index in 2018 against the Democracy Index of 2018, it indicated a containing link between corruption and the health of democracies, where countries with higher levels of corruption also had weaker democratic institutions, as well as decline in respect of political rights. As you can see, countries which are on the far right, that's where we are talking of that not performing so well on the Corruption Perceptions Index, and at the same time not performing well on the Democracy Index. Now moving on to also our research from the Corruption Perceptions Index 2021, we see a relationship between corruption and human rights. We see that countries with high levels of corruption, as measured by the Corruption Perceptions Index, are also highly associated with breaches of civil liberties. And here we looked at the civil liberties score from the Democracy Index. Even though there are outliers that exist, in most cases the relationship is really close, and where more corruption can lead to restrictions of civil liberties, while having fewer civil liberties makes it harder to fight corruption. In both these analyses, one thing that was a common feature was weak in checks and balances, talking of oversight institutions not really functioning in the way that they should, in terms of, holding the powerful to account. Now, having this context on democracy and oversight institutions, let me move on to what TI is doing, which is related to accountability institutions. First of all, we have assessments that we do. We have what we call the National Integrity System, which is an assessment which evaluates key institutions in a country's governance system. We have, as you can see on the left side, we have pillars that we measure. For example, we look at supreme audit institutions, we look at anti-corruption agencies, we look at these different institutions. And what we look at, or what we are evaluating, is in terms of their independence, in terms of their capacity. So this is both in terms of the legal framework as well as in practice. So this is a very important assessment that we have done since the 1990s, and we produce reports at national level. And these reports at national level have really helped in strengthening these institutions, once we engage with various stakeholders when we have the report out. At the moment, we have a project that is focused on the Western Balkans, where we are going to do assessments, of these national integrity systems. So it's something, if anyone has any interest in knowing more, I'm happy to chat after this. Now, moving on to some of the work that we have been doing as Transparency International, I think now bringing it closer to what the other speakers have also been talking about, like how as CSOs we can help in strengthening supreme audit institutions and other oversight institutions. First is we have helped in setting up national anti-corruption agencies and supporting them to do their work. Secondly, I think which is very important is how chapters of Transparency International have engaged in safeguarding the independence of accountability institutions such as supreme audit institutions. I'll give you 2 examples. In 2015, in Kenya, there was a new law which was passed, the Public Audit Act, and this Public Audit Act, it had provisions which interfered with the independence of the Supreme Audit Institution. So what Transparency International Kenya did was that it went to court challenging these provisions which threatened the independence of the Supreme Audit Institution, and the court found in favor of Transparency International and declared the provisions as unconstitutional. So that's one way that we did of sort of strategic litigation aimed at safeguarding the independence of Supreme Audit institutions. The second case was in 2020, where our chapter in Ghana, together with other civil society organizations, also challenged some action by the executive, which were aimed at affecting or curtailing the independence of the Supreme Audit Institution. So these are some of the examples of some of the work that we have been doing at national level in safeguarding the independence of Supreme Audit institutions. Now, moving closer to a project that I've been working on, it's strengthening accountability networks among civil society. This is an EU-funded project which is aimed at enhancing democratic accountability in 21 different countries around the world. And one of the areas that we're working on is on horizontal accountability. And under the horizontal accountability work stream, we are focusing on how, as civil society organizations, we can be involved in enhancing the independence and performance of oversight institutions. And I think one of the most maybe interesting for this audience is we have been working on how, specifically on Supreme Audit institutions, like how, as a project, we can be involved more in ensuring that there's more independence of Supreme Audit institutions in the countries that we're working on. And it's also an area that we have also been exploring with Intosci to see how best we can work together on that. Now, moving on to something, I think this is my last slide, now focusing on work that we're doing as Transparency International, is we have a new strategy 2021 to 2030, which is on holding power to account. What we have realized is that, or what we are standing for, is that the fight against corruption is incompatible without effective oversight institutions, and because without these institutions, then we are not able to, make a contribution in holding the government to account. However, at the same time, what is important is that these institutions have to be independent and have to be effective in carrying out the activities for them to be able to hold the powerful to account for the common good. So in our strategy, one of our joint commitment as a movement is that we should be involved in promoting and supporting the independence of accountability institutions and also advocate for effective managing capacity. What is key for us is that we have a fit-for-purpose architecture of integrity institutions. That is essential for us to be able to, for us to be able to, hold the government to account together with these accountability institutions. Now, the second point also, or second commitment, is that we keep on empowering citizens to work with institutions for the common good, including citizens' roles in helping accountability institutions themselves. Here, what we will be doing is how we will be bringing citizens and Supreme Audit institutions and other accountability institutions together. It could be in various ways. For example, with Supreme Audit institutions, sometimes the report is available, but it's not in an understandable manner for an ordinary citizen to be able to understand. So what we do then is have something which is more citizen-friendly, that citizens can be able to relate to, we'll be able to understand. In that way, we make the results or the findings of supreme audit institutions more clear to citizens, and citizens become more involved in the audit processes if that space is made available. That brings me to another point, that as CSOs, we have been engaging on how we can work together with supreme audit institutions. For example, with TI Kenya, they are involved in the citizen audit accountability, where they are involved in participatory planning with the supreme audit institutions. They are bringing citizens together with supreme audit institutions on planning the audit process. There's also being involved in different activities by the supreme audit institution. So, in conclusion, some of the issues that I think is very important for us to highlight is that accountability institutions, such as supreme audit institutions and civil society organizations, are partners in the accountability system. So it means that for us, we need to work together to ensure that where citizens have space to be able to participate, they are considered on that. And also, citizens play an important role in supporting accountability institutions as they face challenges in terms of institutional, technical, political, and communication constraints in the current de-democratization environment. And I think this is a point that I also looked at how Transparency International has been working on these issues for a long time, be it within NIS assessments, be it in strategic litigation, which is aimed at safeguarding the independence of supreme audit institutions. Also, two other things which are crucial is that we need to strengthen the rule of law. We need to ensure that the supreme audit institutions and other accountability institutions have the right mandate, have the full mandate for them to be able to carry their jobs, to carry their activities. They also have the independence that would also allow them to ensure that they effectively carry out their roles. And secondly, another issue which is important, particularly from the civil society perspective, is that they need to be expansion of the civic space. That way, citizens can also get involved in in the processes that be it with supreme audit institutions or with other accountability institutions. Yeah. So thank you so much. That was all my presentation.
Thank you very much, Jorm. I think it was very informative, and we could really see how using data we can move to concrete actions and really the role of the CSOs in the process. I think it was very informative. But I think during your presentation you highlighted several points and what was the role in anti-corruption. And I think this makes a nice transition to our final presentation before taking contributions from the floor. And that will be by Tim Steele, who will join us online. I don't know if we can put him in. And he will really present this cooperation between SAIs and anti-corruption body. So Tim, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Freddie, and thank you to IDI for inviting me onto this panel. Just by way of background, the name is Tim Steele. I work at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. We are the custodians of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. So I come very much from the corruption world. I'm going to talk to you about a very specific project that we're working on, which is on building collaboration between supreme audit institutions and anti-corruption bodies. This comes from really an initiative from the Supreme Audit Institution of the United Arab Emirates, who have funded it and builds on a distinct cooperation agreement we've got with InterSci. I'm going to try and stay away from acronyms because, can we move to the next slide, please? One of the very first things I'm going to talk about is matching two worlds, and two worlds that don't even talk the same language. I'll give you an example in a little while of just how a very simple language means something different in the anti-corruption world and something different in the world of supreme audit institutions. Talk a little bit about how we've structured this guide. The reason I'm doing that is so you can see how it can be used very practically to build this sort of collaboration. Then talk about the next steps. Can we go on to the next slide, please? As recently as 2019, there was a meeting held in the margins of our Conference of State Parties in Abu Dhabi, and it was a meeting between Supreme Audit institutions and anti-corruption bodies. And we had people from the same country from these two organizations sitting in the same room, and they simply didn't know each other. Easy as that. Now, at first glance, it would appear to be an easy task to actually bring two organizations that share at a very high level sort of common objectives. I mean, strengthening accountability, fighting corruption, very similar things on maybe different sides of the coin. But when you start getting into it, it becomes a lot more complex. Can we go on to the next slide, please? The very first challenge was really looking at the sort of institutional structure. And we're aiming to have a guide that can be used anywhere in the world, and a guide that can bring together best practice from around the world. However, absolutely every national institutional framework is different. I heard my colleague from the Netherlands sort of say, you know, they're called a court, it's a leftover from the past, they report to Parliament. It's quite a neat introduction to me. We see organizations which are still courts. We see organizations which were once courts. We see organizations which were set up to report to parliaments. We see organizations which report to boards. That is just on the Supreme Audit Institution side. The number of different variants on the anti-corruption body side is extraordinary. Whether it's a unitary anti-corruption body, whether it's an anti-corruption body that deals with prevention, whether it's anti-corruption body that deals with enforcement only, whether there's no anti-corruption body and the functions are housed in at least one country I can think of, 43 separate institutions. Anyway, lots of differences. So what we did in the end was create a structure that's based on frameworks provided by InterSci. Now, on the Supreme Audit Institution side, we actually looked at the structure of the institution, and then we used the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. We realized that there were just too many variants in terms of institutional structure. So we had to really start looking on who performed what function, okay? And we come out with a guide. Can we go to the next slide, please? That looks at a series of thematic functions or focuses. Now, you can pretty much add it in respect of corruption for each of these, because the focus very much is on corruption. So prevention of corruption, enforcement of corruption, international cooperation, to counter corruption, that would include potentially international asset recovery, working together to build capacity and generate knowledge to counter corruption, and the use of information and communication technologies to prevent and counter corruption, of course. So if we go quickly to the next slide, I'm not going to take you through each of the thematic areas in great depth, because you would be sitting with us probably for way beyond the time we've got. This looks at enforcement, and I picked the enforcement one because, strangely, I mean, my suspicion would have been that anti-corruption bodies and supreme audit institutions work together more on the sort of prevention side, looking to find ways to prevent corruption, managing corruption risk, etc. In terms of our consultation, we've actually found that there's apparently more collaboration in terms of the enforcement side, detecting, reporting corruption, investigating corruption, asset recovery. Now here, I promised you I would tell you about a word that means something quite different to the two bodies. When I, from the anti-corruption world, hear the term sanction, I think very much about putting people in prison. I think very much of the criminal. We discovered anti-corruption bodies talking about sanction, and supreme audit institutions then saying, but we can also sanction. Then we realized that the sanction very much from the supreme audit institution was a financial sanction, some form of financial penalty, as opposed to some form of criminal penalty. And when you understand that the two are complementary, the two work together, and you may need to do investigation to get to both results, but sometimes the language is basically like two ships passing in the night. The language just misses. Okay, so if we look at the enforcement side, we split each of the themes into a series of areas where we gather examples from around the world of how the bodies have worked together. So, and then we've categorized them. So detecting and reporting corruption. We look at anti-corruption bodies using the audit reports as a source of information to actually detect corruption. We then look at other reporting channels which may involve supreme audit institutions, whether the supreme audit institution has got some sort of responsibility to actually advise an anti-corruption body that they've found corruption, whether in some cases you even find the supreme audit institution receives reports of corruption from the public and takes it through to the anti-corruption body. But there's a lot of different variants. The third area we looked at was switching this around and supreme audit institutions using the results of anti-corruption investigations to actually help develop and target audit plans. I could tell you, I'm not going to take you all the way through the investigating corruption, but it's interesting. You get a couple of categories here. You get the SAI, actually the Supreme Audit Institution actually undertaking the corruption investigation, and then you get the Supreme Audit Institution supporting the investigation. What we found was a very sort of common feature, a very common thing, is in a lot of countries nowadays, the work of the Supreme Audit Institution triggers anti-corruption work. And I think it's worth looking at that. Just when I say a lot of countries, can we move to the next slide, please? We've had 2 meetings of experts and 10 individual consultation meetings to actually gather information, gather examples, work out how to put this guide together. First meeting brought together 39 experts from 24 countries. The second meeting, 133 experts from 48 countries. There's some overlap in countries, but not total. So basically, information has been gathered from 10 international organizations and approximately 60 countries. So it's very broad-based, it's very wide, and in each area we look at, It gives guidance on what can be done, and it gives guidance on what can be done arranged by the institutional structure of the Supreme Audit Institution. So, for instance, if the Supreme Audit Institution is a pure judicial model, it may be able to do a lot of things that a Supreme Audit Institution that reports to Parliament cannot. A Supreme Audit Institution that reports to Parliament also may be perceived as less threatening than one that's got some form of judicial power and may have greater entry points. So a lot of differences in what they can do, what the examples look like, but this provides a lot of food for thought for these two bodies just finding ways to work together. The other thing that will be in there, and can we move maybe to the next slide, please? There will be in there is some guidance on how to make sure that institutional cooperation isn't what it quite often is, where people have the interinstitutional cooperation meeting, and the thing they agree to do at it is have the next interinstitutional cooperation meeting. This is actually aimed at stimulating cooperation around specific issues. Okay. What happens next? One last round of feedback and comments. Those of you who are not falling asleep with my voice going on for a bit too long, who noticed the numbers on the last slide, will see there's a slight imbalance in terms of the number of Supreme Audit institutions consulted. Apropos the number of anti-corruption bodies consulted. So we're going to just try and balance that out to make sure we've got equal coverage from both sides. And we'll launch the guide. There's hopefully not too many fiscal copies. I hate wasting paper. But so we'll launch the guide in the Incusai in Rio de Janeiro at the beginning of November this year. And I hope you all will then take it back to your countries and start using it, because until the accountability organizations find ways of working together, they will work in silos and there'll be a lot of unrealized potential. And this work is really about releasing potential that exists in pretty much each and every jurisdiction in the world by working together within whatever constraints countries face. The accountability institutions should provide a better result than trying to work in silos. Okay, can we go on to the last slide? Okay. If you've got questions, please contact us. Jon was talking about citizens. Every citizen has the right, and indeed the role, to say no to corruption. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. I think it was a very informative presentation where we really see that actually collaboration is not that easy. We looked at a lot of those points. And I think this wraps up this first round of presentation. It would be good to also give you the opportunity to reflect a bit on some of the points that were raised here and to either make contribution or raise questions for the panelists. So I think we'll do a round. I can see that we already have a colleague from the Gambia wants to make a contribution, and we'll also have a colleague from IDI who will make some points. So we'll just take the first three now. Yeah, but I think the best way is to go to the,
Thank you, Freddie, and good afternoon. It was a beautiful presentation, and there are certain takeaways that I've actually learned from the presentation, but also have some questions, because I actually believe accountability is only possible where there are evidences to drive accountability initiatives. And for that to happen, the SAI needs to have access to financial statements for them to be audited. But in other countries, the government, the executive, delays financial statements for it to be audited by the SAI, but there are no legal frameworks to say if you delay these financial statements, what happened? Now I'll give you a clear example of my country. The recent SAI report that we have is 2018, right? Not that we don't have auditors to audit. We have competent auditors to audit them, but whenever they go to the government to access information to audit, it is not available. And at some point when I engaged the Auditor General and asked the question, he said, let me tell you one thing. At some point, we have to help SOEs to prepare their financial statements and then audit them. So I think we need to start rethinking or looking at now the legal framework where executive or institutions fail to present their audit reports on time, and just to ensure that audit reports are available to the citizens on time, because what happens at the point, you will have to deal with accountability for 2 years or 3 years back while they are other pressing issues that are supposed to take place on time. So that's one thing. And then the other things also is, should we now consider using SAI report as a KPI to determine how much an institution should be allocated annually and whether certain fiscal programs should continue or not? I ask this question because SAIs will audit public institutions, and then sometimes there are misappropriation or corrupt activities that actually takes place. But the SAI can only investigate and present their report either to the anti-corruption bodies or to Parliament. But the SAI cannot prosecute. But at many instances, the Parliament will not also take any accountability initiative, and the government will say, we will implement the recommendations, and then that's it. But then, should we now look at if there are corrupt activities found in the auditor's report, and certain programs that have been, expending a lot of money without yielding any impact, should we use the auditor's report as a KPI to determine these fiscal allocations? So that will be my contributions and questions.
Thank you very much. I think those are very important points that the panelists will react to. So we'll. Do you want to go to that? Maybe react to this first. No, we'll take a round. So if you would like.
My name is Tom Bridle. I'm at a company called Chemonics, which is a USAID contractor. I was at USAID before that and worked a lot on legislative strengthening and accountability institutions. And what I wanted to point out is something similar to what my colleague pointed out here, which is that in a lot of cases the weakness is really in the legislature and the legislative structure, which is that the way this is supposed to work in theory is that the auditor produces a report which identifies certain failings, and the Parliament reacts by, for example, changing the budget of that institution or imposing new rules on that institution, or in some way has some sort of a political reaction to it. But in situations where the Parliament is either dominated by one party for a longer period of time, or where the Parliament has no effective budgetary powers, that whole process is vitiated essentially, and you have what happens in Gambia and so many other countries, that the Auditor General produces an occasional report. Sometimes the reports are very good quality, but sometimes people even read the reports. But it's very difficult to get anybody to act on it if there's no institution. So what I wanted to ask was whether there are mechanisms not only for cooperation with the anti-corruption bodies, as Tim Steele pointed out, but whether Intosai is thinking about how to work with the Parliament on the one hand to ensure that there is at least a technical capacity in the Parliament, and then on the other hand, thinking about, as my colleague said again, which is the pressure on the executive to actually produce data which actually makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think that those are very important points. Camilla, I think you have a contribution, and then we'll give the panelists a chance to react.
Yes, thank you. My name is Camilla Fredriksson, and I also work in the IDI. And I just wanted to share some of the experience that we've been having in working with the IMF during the pandemics. And the IMF addressed us because, as you know, they released more than $100 billion in emergency financing. And in those commitments, in those agreements with countries, there were inserting commitments on audit to safeguard the mismanagement of the funds. And in our work with the IMF, they approached us. They wanted to understand how we can use audit reports as a tool to inform and also to uncover potential misuse. And we've been looking into the different audits on emergency financing that has been done in these last 2 years. And what we're seeing is very interesting because it's not only about the expenditure and the mismanagement, the funds that are embezzled, but there are also very many interesting and useful reports there in countries such as South Africa, in Kenya, in Jamaica, for example. But what we also see is that those PFM weaknesses, those structural weaknesses that are already existing there, they are being intensified during the crisis. So the findings of the emergency financing audits are not really particular. They are just more of the same. And how this is interesting is that a lot of the audits that were done, they're not only like looking at the expenditure, as I was saying, it's also looking at how the budgetary oversight and the planning was also missing, and also looking at those aspects of the institutional framework, which could be, safeguards against corruptive behavior, and looking at how these are not functioning. So I'm talking about like internal control, procurement, asset declarations. And this is really like some place where we see that, size can really play a role in, going back to our previous contributor here and talking about, how they can work with anti-corruption bodies, what they can point out. But what we also see in this global stock-taking report that Silke referred to in her intervention is that when it comes to actually government taking up the recommendations of SAI, this is not really happening. So at least I just wanted to share this because we see that this work with the IMF is very much interested in seeing how size can be used. And also we are trying to drive and advocate for IMF to actually use the size work more actively, in the overall work that they do when they have in-country dialogue, and include that aspect of size, accountability, when they discuss, political economy and economic development. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Camilla. And I think now we can ask the panelists to reflect a bit on some of those points. We talked about the timeliness, access to the records, use of audit reports as KPIs, how it could inform, but also the cooperation with other stakeholders, because we focused a lot on the cooperation with anti-corruption body, but what about Parliament? So maybe I can ask Ewout to reflect a bit.
Which question? Because there were several.
Yeah, timeliness, maybe the access to records, or.
Yeah, well, timeliness. You're from the Gambia. Actually, in the 1970s, some of the last century, some of the Dutch annual reports of the Dutch central government were only submitted to Parliament in the 80s, because there was such a backlog in just administration which was not up to standard. So I'm not really surprised, and I think the best thing to do is, of course, shame them, and that's, I would say, also the task of the Supreme Audit Institution, to shame them that they haven't kept records literally up to date. And it's also, we haven't discussed this one particular, but it's also the task of journalists, I would say, also an accountability partner, to definitely also shame them based on reports from Supreme Audit Institution that the government has not has its house in order. And obviously Parliament is very useful in this regard as well. Well, I mean, we are in a particular comfortable situation in the sense that sometimes we have reports which are really written very concisely and very balanced, and I would even say nuanced. I'm not going to use the word boring, but, and then we send this report to press and they make something like a headline. This is a damning report of the Netherlands Court of Audit. It's really, it's a bombshell report, and really, really, if you've read it, well, it's fine for me. But and that, I mean, that is also the task of journalists to agenda shortcomings in public administration. And then usually when that happens, it also helps the parliament to get into action. But if you don't have them, then obviously I think the other person, he was reacting to this, that sometimes you have a one-party system, for example, or parliament are not really doing their work as much as you would like them to do that. But you still hopefully have critical journalists, and I can tell you from my experience in Africa, not from the Gambia, but was working with some Supreme Audit institutions in Africa, that sometimes you have seen semi-authoritarian regimes, at best mixed democracies, and you still see Supreme Audit institutions which are capable of submitting very critical reports, which are really quite harsh. So they're always, I would say, partners in accountability, even in much more difficult circumstances than we are.
Yeah, I think that's a very strong point. Now reacting on the use of PSI reports as KPIs, maybe Jerome, you want to say something? Oh, timeliness again. Okay, yes. That's the interesting one. But we'll have to, yeah. So please, if you can come to the...
Yeah, thank you, Freddie. So my point is also on timeliness, and I think this is also an area that as civil society organizations we can play a role. I think you talked about shaming. I think it's one area that as civil society organizations we are in a position to do, to say, where are the audit reports, or what have you done with the audit reports? And I think that brings back to some of the points that I talked about for us having something like reports or information which is understandable to citizens, where citizens have information about, for example, like how there was mismanagement of money, but then in an understandable manner, then citizens can also play a role in ensuring that, there is accountability, there is follow-up. They can go to their members of parliament, what is happening with this, with these reports, etc. So I think that's something which is very important. As as civil society organizations, we can play a role in ensuring that there is actually follow-up on the reports. And also even on, I think the first, I think you also talked about access to the information. I think civil society organizations, we also have other mechanisms. For example, we can submit freedom of information requests, access to information requests. I think that's another way that, we can, make sure that there is actually access to this information, and maybe that information could then become even more available for Supreme Audit institutions. So that was my point.
Oh, thank you very much, Jerome. I can see that Silke also wants to react on timeliness.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for all your questions and comments, which are really very relevant and which are just, I think, practical examples of what we just presented before. Especially this problem also with refusing access to the necessary information is what I also mentioned as one of the main findings of the latest global stock taking report, saying that only half of SCIs, or less than half of the SCIs, say that they have really the necessary access to the timely, free and unconstrained information. And that's, I think, a practical example. This is something we have to work on. And also my colleagues, previous speakers already said it. I think it's very important to mobilize also public awareness, On the one hand, the media, on the other hand, civil society, the citizens, so that they put pressure also on governments, on the audited entities. And I think this is really important and something we are working on. Also, together with donors, as Camilla said, of course, this is also a very important vehicle and an important way, I think, to really make some changes. If donors cooperate and if donors say, yes, we only give you the money if your SEIs is entitled to audit this and that. I think this is a very efficient tool and an efficient way, and this is what we're increasingly doing. Another point I would like to briefly touch upon is our cooperation with parliaments. This is, of course, also really essential, and we just before this session we spoke with IDI about cooperation with the Interparliamentary Union, the umbrella organization of parliaments, and we're also cooperating with the IPU, the Interparliamentary Union, and to create awareness among parliament and parliamentarians is crucial for us. And as Eva already said, we are really, I think all SEIs around the globe are currently trying to make their reports more better readable, better accessible for our citizens through various tools and means like graphs, visualizations, precise and clear language, so that really we see more and more our citizens as our stakeholders, not only parliaments, but also really the citizens and civil society.
Yeah, maybe just one quick add to this, because it was one of the questions as well. So how do you support Parliament? What we do, and I understood this week that our Libyan colleagues do the same, this is really a recommendation to every Supreme Audit institutions. We offer briefings to Member of Parliaments before we publish our report. So we publish our report at 5. At 5 o'clock. We offer a briefing at 4. And and so they don't actually have to read the whole report because, you know, Parliament, and I've been a member of Parliament myself, they are busy people. They don't have always time to read hundreds of pages, so not only for citizens but also for members of Parliament. So we take them through the whole report. They know everything, the key things which are in this report. And the good thing is, when a journalist calls them about this bombshell report from the Netherlands Court of Audit or the Austrian Court of Accounts, they are actually very informed about what is in the report and can react to that, and then you can strengthen each other, and it works. It works. So really, we can do much more together.
Thank you very much. And I think even on your presentation and your response, Silke, you touched upon this element of KPIs, because we've seen that more and more we're also using SEI's report as benchmarks when it comes to external funding. So this is a certain way of making sure that records are accessible and reports are published in time. I don't know if Tim has any contribution to make on one of the points.
I think 2 contributions really. The first one is a very general contribution. No matter what the state of your governance or your institution, there's always improvements and always wins that can be made. And I think, particularly around the area of corruption prevention, through a coordination between institutions, coordination with the citizenry, coordination with civil society, it may not be easy to identify exactly what you need to do, but there will always be organizations that need strengthening and are willing to actually take actions which will reduce the risk of corruption, which will improve governance. Maybe not across the board, but there will always be something you can do. That's the first thing, and you have to think about it. The second thing is that we noticed, in terms of responses we got, that there is an increasing tendency to give powers of financial sanction to the SAI. And I think that's perhaps something that in the global environment can be built on a little bit more, because clearly when financial waste or mismanagement is identified, they may not have been criminal, but they've caused a loss to the state. And if they could be held accountable, that would obviously make people be a lot more cautious in what they do. Maybe one last very quick point. In terms of the reporting, I think one good practice we picked up from one country is that every year the SAI provides a summary of all the instances where it's identified potential or actual corruption, and that summary goes to Parliament, which makes it much easier for Parliament, obviously, to see what should be looked at in terms of at least corruption. Hopefully that's helpful. That's all from me for now.
Thank you very much, Tim. I think that's very helpful, and we are mindful of the time. I think it's close to the end of the session. I don't know if there's any reaction, final comment that we could take before wrapping up. Is there, maybe from someone who hasn't spoken yet? Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Kamel Ayedi. My question is about the control of audit of supreme audit institutions. We have some concerns in our country, and I know that there are also concerns in other countries. Who and which is the body who should control the management of supreme audit institutions? I know that you have a peer review control, but is it mandatory or is it voluntary something? Because you control everyone, but you manage also public funds. You need to be controlled and you need to be held into account.
Thank you very much. Who audits the auditor?
Yes, well, it's a classic one, and it's very difficult to answer actually, because it's not very helpful if we check the most powerful people, we audit the most powerful people in the country, yeah, irrespective of which country you are as a supreme audit institution. So, for example, we are appointed for life, but so you cannot fire me if you are the minister or whatever. But obviously, who's auditing us? That's your question. In terms of the financial accounts, we voluntarily hire a private accountant. To see if there's a different result there. And we use the peer review, which is voluntary. So supreme audit institutions are free to choose whether they want to use that or not. There is no international rule or whatever, but I would recommend every side to do it. And very important, not only to do a peer review by other sides, but also to, before you start, commit to publish the result completely. And there's a stage before the peer review, which is called the side PMF, a sort of a self-evaluation, but which is very rigid. The Libyan Audit Bureau has recently did it. We also discussed the results from that. And we also did it before we did our peer review, and we also published that one. So there's really a lot which you can do. But in the end, yeah, it's very difficult. You can make terms for auditor generals or deputy auditor generals, depending on your system. But yeah, you should be, of course, very careful that you cannot fire the auditor.
Yes, I think we would have much more to do, but it's already, unfortunately, time. And I think it was good food for thought. Like, there's always room for improvement. Who audits the auditor? But we also see the value of having institutional cooperation and how to work across the ecosystem to make sure that we promote accountability. So I would really like to thank the panelists for their contribution and their presentation that were very timely, and also all the delegates for your insightful contribution as well, and call the session to an end. Thank you very much.